Hi everyone, it's Rob Watson, the module leader for TECH2503 Community Media Production, and this is just a short overview of the topics that we'll be covering in the lecture for week 20 or lecture 21, and the title is for this session is Essay and Report Writing. What I wanted to do is, because you've got an assignment which is due in a few weeks' time, check the wiki for the date of submission, and it's based around a kind of formal academic report. So the idea is that I thought I'd do with this is kind of go into some of the background structure of report writing and essay writing. I'll use the two fairly interchangeably, but you'll see the differences as we proceed. So I'm going to start off by giving a kind of a recap, if you like, of the kind of where we got in our previous week in lecture 20, which is about the kind of way that we adopt what we might call a critical disposition, so a stance of inquiry. If you like, you might call it a kind of sense of skepticism, that we question things, that we ask questions about how things got to where they are in the form that they are, and how do they work, and how do people make sense of them, and how can we move forward to think about how they can be changed and developed in the future. And included in this is a kind of sense that we need to maintain a level of open-mindedness, that we have to trust the process that's available to us in terms of reasoning process, and the different types of reasoning that might be available to us as well. We want to be well informed in order to be able to put forward a good argument, we would hope, but we'd also want to be flexible to alternatives that might crop up and that might be drawn to our attention in the process. So our undertaking is, if you like, to be fair-minded and prudent about our own biases. So we recognise that our own experiences is situated in our cultural context that we're in. At the moment, we don't invent ourselves, we're not born afresh and anew each time we write something. We have to learn from each other, and that means that we are ourselves situated within a context. But we're reflexive and we're open to change. So we have the potential and the capability to look at the world anew and to ask questions about it and kind of say, well, we did it like that in the past and look at where it got us. What can we do in the future, and where do we get our ideas from that might suggest it might just be a little bit more agreeable to do it in this way rather than that way. So the format of producing a report or an essay is one which is kind of really about extending your thinking and really training our minds to consider a more detailed argument, to be able to put forward a point of view which it doesn't just rely on, if you like, on the first thing that pops into our head or the kind of banter that maybe might emerge in a kind of an open conversation that we have with friends. So there's a couple of factors that we want to take account of. So things like stating questions clearly, being orderly in the way that we present information and manage and research information, having some diligence, making sure that we turn over every stone and we ask appropriate questions. And are we being reasonable in the kind of criteria that we're applying to the problem that we want to look at? So there's a kind of care. We take a lot of care in terms of not just relying on our own personal experience, but we look to other people who have provided insight about the issues that we're considering previously and in other circumstances. And this is quite a challenging process, because it means that we are faced with problems that we have to rethink through, and that we have to kind of define ourselves in a world which is very kind of flowing with information, the kind of information overload situation. And we have to be able to say, well, actually, we're quite precise about what we're talking about. So I want to kind of address the way that a report or an essay works. In this case, maybe more a report. Things like who's going to be reading the report, how will they. This is all useful stuff to think about when you're planning for your report. How are they going to use the report? It's often a good question. How will they extract information? How are they going to try and make sense of the information? And what will they gain from using the learning that you're putting into your report? So we'll look at the way that reports are structured and formatted, the kind of sections and subsections, the kind of numbering, the kind of sense of style guides, and really the kind of idea that you don't really read a report, but you access a report and you mine it for information. Nobody sits down to read a report in their leisure time, except for a few geeks, I suppose. Most people will look at a report and they'll go to the sections where they need to get information that's relevant to them. So It's founded on a report. A good report is founded on evidence, which comes from verifiable sources, and a sense of direct observation or quantitative or qualitative data that's been collected. You might look at secondary sources, and you might use kind of desktop work, or you might use multimedia evidence. That all forms part of the kind of the body of evidence that gives your report credibility. And I suppose that's what we're really looking for. Will your report be plausible and credible? Is it founded on sufficient evidence to make sense and be credible? We'll then look at the kind of writing style, writing formally and informally, whether you're reporting facts and information, whether it's a technical brief, if it's a technical requirement that you want to look at. It's useful to look at other forms of reports so that you get a sense of how your report might work differently from them. And then we'll look at the way that, in this instance, I'm going to use the APA referencing guide. I know the Standard University guide is for Harvard. I personally find the APA guide just a little bit easier. It is built into Microsoft Word as well. You don't have to add anything to it. And it gives us a way to cite illustrations and cite books and articles and journal articles in a more accessible way. So we'll kind of look at that briefly. And then finally, the thing that we'll look at last, but by no means least important, is the expectations around academic practice and plagiarism, and the rules that universities place on all students and all members of staff to be fair dealing in to deal fairly in the sources and the information that they use and pass on as their own work. So there's a lot to look at in this. It's going to be quite a detailed lecture, and we'll probably have to race through it, but I've produced quite a detailed set of notes which I've culled from a lot of different sources, and hopefully it'll be practically useful for you to engage with. So the PowerPoint presentation will be available. I've got the PowerPoint presentation. You'll get the notes. These will be up on the DMU Commons wiki, which is at wiki.our.dmu.ac.uk. The reading associated for this week is the Kevin Howley chapter 23. It's the Brian Woodnam book, The Feminist Guerrilla Video in the Twin Cities. It sounds good. I've completely forgotten what that chapter's about, so I'll have to go and have a look at it myself just to remind myself of what it's about. So I'll see you at the lecture on Thursday.